أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والفجر وليال عشر والشفع والوتر والليل إذا يسر هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بعاد إرم ذات العماد التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد وثمود الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد وفرعون ذي الأوتاد الذين طغوا في البلاد فأكثروا فيها الفساد فصب عليهم ربك صوت عذاب إن ربك لبالمرصاد فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه فيقول ربي أكرمن وأما إذا ما ابتلاه فقدر عليه رزقه فيقول ربي أهانن كلا بل لا تكرمون اليتيم ولا تحاضون على طعام المسكين وتأكلون التراث أكلا لما وتحبون المال حبا جما كلا إذا دكت الأرض دكا دكا وجاء ربك والملك صفا صفا وجيء يومئذ بجهنم يومئذ يذكر الإنسان وأنى له الذكرى يقول يا ليتني قدمت لحياتي فيومئذ لا يعذب عذابه أحد ولا يوثق أيتها النفس المطمئنة يا أيتها النفس المطمئنة ارجعي إلى ربك راضية مرضية فادخلي في عبادي وادخلي جنتي صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات Just a short 1-minute speech. The Holy Quran, as everyone knows, it allows the human to follow it precisely. So we are able to follow the Quran precisely. It gives us that ability. Imam Ali alayhi salam, of course, Nabi Muhammad and Ali Rasul, salawat. Allahumma salla ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Or the Qurana of the Kitabullah, they will tell us how to follow it. Imam Ali alayhi salam says, the highest form of teaching is by doing the thing to show others. The lowest form is by talking. Imam al-Rida alayhi salam, who tonight is his birthday, he says, كونوا دعاة لنا لا بألسنتكم, from what I remember, which means raise awareness of us, tell others about us without your tongue, which means with your deeds, with your akhlaq, with your amal. Imam al-Hasan and Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, as we've heard the story before, when they saw the other older man trying to do wudu, even in their young age, they knew what to do. They were telling each other, Imam Hassan telling Imam Hussein, look at me, this is how I do wudu. Is this right? And Imam Hassan saying no. And they were both doing it right. But they were just trying to get the attention, which we hope these days we can also pay some attention and learn, which is very important. Give attention and learn. And so in this way, the old man, he realized, he gave attention, and he learned how to do the wudu, because he saw them doing it. Inshallah, we ask God, we get the sunan of the Prophet Muhammad and his al, and be following the Quran through them. Thank you. Salawat.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين، خاتم النبيين، جد الحسن والحسين بالقاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المكرمين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. ولعنة الله على الأعدائهم أجمعين. أما بعد، فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. صدق الله العلي العظيم. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Assalamu alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Tonight, by the grace of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, on this auspicious and blessed occasion, we celebrate the birth of our beloved Imam Ar-Rida alayhi salatu wasalam, the 8th Imam of the Ahlul Bayt, one whose munificence, generosity, his knowledge and wisdom were unbelievable, astonishing. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless him and grant us the tawfiq to pay our respects to him in ziyarat, insha'Allah ta'ala. Now, just to, first of all, of course, respect to Brother Saeed, Jazakallah khair, for that recitation of the Quran, as well as the enlightenment regards to the Ahlul Bayt, the speaking Quran, the ones who personify the message of the Quran, and the ones through whom we understand the true path of Islam. Now, don't want to take up too much time, just want to briefly discuss the descent, the lineage of Imam al-Rida, as well as some of his characteristics before, inshallah, we move on to the main lecture by our respected speaker, Dr. Ali. Imam al-Rida's father, Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam, he was married to a woman of North African descent. This was a freed woman. In other words, she was previously a servant, and afterwards she was freed, and Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salatu wasalam married her. This was a woman who was not Arab. She had a dark skin tone, and she belonged to the lowest levels on the social hierarchy. Now this is of key importance. There's a wisdom behind every action that the Ahlul Bayt alayhim salam took, including their marriages. The later Imams, they often married to people of this dark skin tone, of North African descent. And this demonstrates to us that these barriers which we often have in our societies, they're completely contrived, they're completely man-made. There's absolutely nothing Islamic about them whatsoever. Now, just to briefly discuss some of the characteristics of Imam al-Rida, as I'm sure many of us might know, he was forcibly taken from his home in Medina to the city of Tus by the accursed Abbasid Caliph Ma'mun al-Rashid la'natullah alayh. And this was in order for Ma'mun to gain some sense of legitimacy, because he was despised by the people. This was a man who killed his own brother in order to get into power. Now, Imam al-Rida alayhi salatu wassalam, Ma'mun al-Rashid used his popularity amongst the people in order to try and advantage himself, in order to try and legitimize his own position. And so he forcibly took him from his home under the pain of death and chose him to be his heir apparent. Now, Imam al-Rida at this point, the Muslim Ummah, was the world's strongest superpower, and he was the crown prince of the Muslim Ummah at this time. As-Sultan al-Arabi wal-Ajam, the king of the Arabs and the non-Arabs. The way Imam al-Rida alayhi salam used his power, however, was unbelievable. I was attending a lecture last night by Sheikh Ali Mahdi, and he was mentioning something amazing. Imam al-Rida had an entire throng of servants and retainers at his beck and call, people who would report to him, people over whom he had authority, so many people. And he had a very affluent and luxurious position. And yet, despite this, whenever he would have a meal, he would have it alongside his servants, and he would not eat a single morsel of food until every other servant had eaten before him. Such was his amazing character. Now, this is something that's beautiful about the Ahlul Bayt. You find that there is wisdom in their example in all walks of life. Whether you are rich, whether you're poor, whether you're weak or powerful, whether you're sick or healthy, you find inspiration from the example of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salatu wassalam. Now, just one other incident I want to mention before finishing. Al-Ma'mun's plan backfired repeatedly because Imam al-Rida's position, it only made him stronger and more popular amongst the people. His aim was to try and delegitimize Imam al-Rida and gain a sense of legitimacy himself, but it had the opposite effect, his moves, each and every single time. So on one occasion, he got a whole bunch of theologians, philosophers, thinkers, academics from across the world, people from a Christian background, Jewish background, atheistic background. He got them together and ordered Imam al-Rida alayhi salam to debate with them. The aim here was to try and trap Imam al-Rida in some kind of intellectual bind in order to delegitimize him, show that this is not in fact the representative of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this was another amazing point which Sheikh Ali Mahdi mentioned last night. Imam al-Rida, not only did he respond comprehensively and thoroughly to these people, he replied to them in their own language, in their own dialect. He spoke to people from Rome, from Persia, from Turkey, from Hind, all these different lands in their own language. And this is again a great lesson for us, not to restrict the religion of Islam to one language or to the way that we were brought up, not to one kind of upbringing, but to expand it in order to try and reach a broad audience. And this is one of the failures of many of our communities, which we need to improve upon greatly. So inshallah ta'ala we can do that. As Brother Saeed was mentioning, we understand Islam through the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. So if we truly purport to follow the Ahlul Bayt, we must not restrict the religion to just one group or one audience, but to expand it and broaden it. So inshallah ta'ala we can take away that lesson tonight amongst many others. And with that, I would like to conclude and invite our beloved speaker for the night. Please welcome Dr. Ali As-Sama'il with 3 loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Thank you very much, respected brothers and sisters. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. الحمد لله الأول قبل الإنشاء والإحياء والآخر بعد فناء الأشياء. العليم الذي لا ينسى من ذكره ولا ينقص من شكره. اللهم صل وسلم وزد وبارك على عبدك ورسولك وحبيبك وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك أبي القاسم محمد. وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين أجمعين لا سيما بقية الله في الأرضين. Assalamu alaikum, respected brothers and sisters. I'm not sure, do we have sisters here too or just the brothers today? Okay, inshallah. So I think the very happy to be here, inshallah. Thank you very much. It's an honor to be part of this program, and may Allah bless everyone, inshallah, for this commemoration of the birth of our 8th holy Imam, Imam Ali ibn Musa Rida alayhi salam. So tonight I was asked to speak about this topic of ambassadors of faith, and I think the Brother Saeed and Brother Hussein have already covered many of the really important points about this topic, the importance of being ambassadors for faith with our actions primarily, and then with our words, as a secondary thing, and to demonstrate the beautiful akhlaq, like the akhlaq of Imam Rida alayhi salam, the humbleness, the generosity that he manifested. So inshallah, firstly today, just a few ayat from the Quran that sort of help us focus on the issue of learning from actions rather than from words, and then a few sort of examples that I've personally experienced, and then inshallah we'll make one final point about a slightly nuanced issue that we really need to keep in mind, and then inshallah we'll have the Q&A. So firstly, the Holy Quran says about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, لَقَدْ كَانَ لَكُمْ فِيهِ أُسْوَةٌ حَسَنَةٌ. In the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you have the best example. So the idea behind this ayah is that we don't just learn from the teachings of the Prophet or his words, but also from his actions. And this is why this ayah is one of the reasons why we hold on so dearly to the sunnah of the Prophet and the Imams, their actions, everything that they did. Because sometimes your teacher will, for example, teach you all about humbleness, right? Or all about, being nice to your friends. But then you see that same teacher who told you, for example, not to bully your friend in the schoolyard, or to be kind or good to your friend. You'll see that same teacher in the staff room, for example, speaking in a very degrading way about a teacher who's not there, right? And you immediately then lose any kind of, I guess, there's no way that you would then follow what that teacher taught you. So if in the next class that teacher came and said, you should be really good to your friends, and you shouldn't bully them, you know, immediately you would raise your hand and say, but I heard you doing this the other day, right? So we know that the example that's set is much more powerful than words. Kids, you know, we know that one of their first objections when their parents tell them to do something is, how come I saw you, you know, not doing that the other day, right? So something as simple as telling, for example, your son or daughter to wear their helmet when they're riding their scooter or their bike, you've got to make sure that you've put yours on first and you wear it all the time, because their first question will be, how come you're not doing it, right? So we know this is something that we know is teaching through example, being a role model in action is far more powerful than in terms of words and teachings. The Holy Quran also says about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ, and you are on the best, very best, or the grandest of akhlaq, right? خُلُقٍ عَظِيم. So it's again highlighting that the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his akhlaq was, you know, was perfect, was immaculate, not just his teachings, not just the words that he said to people, not just the lectures that he gave. And the Holy Quran also says about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or to the Prophet, وَلَوْ كُنْتَ فَضًّا غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ لَانْفَضُّوا مِنْ حَوْلِكَ وَلَكِنْ بِرَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ لِنْتَ لَهُمْ. If you were fadh, like if you were harsh, غَلِيظَ الْقَلْبِ, you're hard-hearted, they would have dispersed from around you. But by a mercy from Allah, you became like soft or lenient to them. And this was what allowed many people who were, you know, enemies of each other to come together around the Holy Prophet. The Aus and Khazraj were two tribes in Medina who had been fighting for decades, if not centuries, and yet they came together under the leadership of the Prophet. You know, now, in our, you know, Brother Hussein mentioned a couple of problems that we have in our centers with language and race, and part of the effects of this is that we're so divided. You know, we have maybe just within a 10-minute radius, we have 5, 6, 7 different centers. Everyone, you know, there's a very slight difference in culture, sometimes even people from the same country, and yet, you know, we want to have our own center, our own style of programs and so on, right? And this is something that, you know, has its benefits, right? I mean, if each of our centers is full and has a, you know, a vibrant program every week, then alhamdulillah, that's good. But otherwise, surely we can come together on some sort of common ground, right? And this is what in the absence of a prophet or an imam, this can be very hard to achieve, right? But when or someone who really represents their teachings. But the Prophet ﷺ was able to bring people from many different backgrounds together. And this was, again, through his akhlaq, his incredible akhlaq. So just a few stories that I find, you know, very touching. One day the Holy Prophet ﷺ was sitting in a room, like imagine like this. Obviously back then people sat on the ground and the room was full. And it seems like there was a carpet laid in that room. So back then there wasn't always carpet. We know, for example, the Prophet never prayed on carpet, but in some gatherings they would sit, and if it was too hot, there would be some sort of straw mat or something like that. So they were all sitting, and the room was full, and a companion came, and he had nowhere to sit, right? So imagine this hall was full, and there were chairs, and there was a person out there who didn't have a chair. And the speaker is someone like very, not like me, someone very special, right? And the speaker stops his speech and is worried about that person at the door, right? So this is what the Prophet did. The Prophet stood up, he took off his own coat, his own aba, folded it, and he threw it to that person. He said, you sit on that. Now, do you think that person sat on the Prophet's aba? No, he kissed it. This was an amazing honor for him, right? This was what the Prophet was like. When he spoke to people in a gathering, he made sure he shared the eye contact with everyone. He didn't just look at the one person who was his friend or the rich person or the influential person. No, everyone he treated the same, right? Even when it came to just eye contact. And one day the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Imam Ali alayhi salam, comes to him and he says to Imam Ali that my shirt is old and tattered and I want you to go and buy me a shirt. Here are 12 dinars, okay? So he gives Imam Ali alayhi salam these 12 dinars, and the Imam goes, and of course the Imam loves the Prophet, so he buys him the best shirt that he possibly can. So he spends all the 12 dinars on this shirt. And he brings it to the Prophet, and the Prophet ﷺ says, where's the change? He says, oh, what do you mean? He says, like, it's too much. Let's go back, and I'm sure we can buy a shirt for less than this. So they go back to the market, and they speak to the shopkeeper and say, can we have something else cheaper? So the Prophet then buys a shirt, and back then a shirt was like a long garment, for 4 dinars, and then give us back, 8 dinars in change. So they do this, and then as the Prophet ﷺ is then walking with now the money in the 8 dinars left, he sees a little girl sitting on the side of the road crying, right? And she's clearly like a servant, right? And so he says to her, again, why would the Prophet stop? This girl was, back then, there was a lot of sexism. Women were seen as inferior. This was a child. Back then, people had very little regard for children. She was a slave. And yet the Prophet stops and he asks her, why are you crying? And she says that my family that I work for, they sent me to buy something from the market and I lost the money. And if I go back now and I don't have what they asked me to buy, they're going to treat me very badly, right? So the Prophet says, how much did you lose? She says, 4 dinars. So he gives her 4 dinars, right? And now he's got how many left? Who can do good maths? Okay. So he then goes, and then the Prophet somehow, it seems, he sort of, as he hasn't gone very far from this place, he then meets a man that, and this man is walking around saying, I don't have like anything to wear or to eat, right? I have nothing. Please, someone have some mercy on me, right? And what the Prophet ﷺ does in that moment is he takes off so he has like the new shirt that he had bought himself, right? And rather than saying to the man, for example, here is the remaining 4 dinar, you go and buy a shirt, or even I'll go and buy one for you. No, he just gives him the shirt that he had just bought. And now the Prophet again doesn't have a shirt, right? But he's got still the 4 dinars left. So he goes back to the shop and he buys another shirt for 4 dinars. Now he's got no money, okay? But he's got a shirt. And he's walking back home and the same little girl is there on the side of the street, still crying. And he says, what's wrong? And she says, Ya Rasulullah, I now have the shirt. I have the thing that the family wanted me to buy, but I'm late. And they're going to be very harsh with me again. So he says, so now the Prophet has no money, but he has time. So he says, you know what? I'll come with you. So he comes with her to the door of the house and he says, Salaam alaikum, Salaam alaikum, Salaam alaikum. They finally reply. And he says that, please, for my sake, don't be harsh with this girl. And they say, Ya Rasulullah, because of your sa'i, your walking here, she is free for the sake of Allah, right? So this girl now had her life to look forward to. She was no longer a slave. She was freed, which usually would cost in the thousands of dirhams, and she would have to work her whole life to save this up. She was actually freed there and then because of the actions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. And so we have many, many, many examples from the lives of the Ahlul Bayt. Imam Hassan and Imam Ali alayhi salam, one day they're in whether, I can't remember if it's Medina or Kufa, but there's a man from Sham, under the influence of Muawiyah, who swears at them. You are such and such, really awful words. And yet, instead of, for example, replying back harshly, they invite him to their house and they feed him and they give him a place to stay, right? Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam, for example, would be, there's a farmer who had a farm opposite the house of the Imam, and he would insult the Imam every single day, right? And then the Imam one day says, why are you always so stressed? And he says, my crop, and I'm always worried. And the Imam actually gives him the amount of the whole crop for that year, the wealth that crop would generate for an entire year. The Imam gives it to a man who would insult him every single day. Just so this man, is no longer stressed and he's not angry, and he's not swearing at the Imam or other people. Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam, on his deathbed, right? His family is gathered and he says, that cousin of mine who always speaks ill of me, who, questions my imamah, who take this money and give it to him. They say, why? He says, because I want to do salatul rahim. It's one of the great, obligations. I don't want to die without even this hateful cousin of mine having a problem with me. Imam Rida alayhi salam, a man comes to stab him or to assassinate him. And the Imam, with kind words and mercy wins this man over. This was the style of the Imams alayhimus salam. Now, the important point that we need to keep in mind in today's world, and this really is very powerful, right? Like the other day I was at work. I work as a GP in Meadowbank. Meadowbank is just a suburb in Sydney. It's not a Muslim majority place. There are a lot of Muslims from Pakistani background, Indian background, Arabs, but it's not a majority Muslim area. There are many Chinese, Australian, Indian background people who are not Muslim. I have a patient who's an Australian man, Australian background, and he used to come see me sometimes, and he'd mention that he goes to visit Indonesia sometimes here and there, and we just never did we talk about Islam or bring it up. And the other day, just out of the blue, like 2 weeks ago, I was just getting a coffee outside the medical center, and he comes up to me and he says, Dr. Ali, thank you. I did my shabada the other day. And I said, what? Shabada? And he said, my shabada. And I said, what are you talking about? He says, you mean your shahada? He goes, yes. I said, what? Like this Australian man who, the last person I would have thought would be interested in Islam. He says, I went to Indonesia again, and the people there looked after my brother. He was there and he got sick and whatever. And I just saw the kindness. I saw the spirituality, and I really thought I can't not be a part of this, right? And then he said, thank you for being a good role model for me, among many other role models. I said, okay. Never talked to him about Islam, right? We might have met, here and there over the years, for a medical consultation. But, people actually pick up on very small things that we do, very small things. So whatever it is that my job is or my role in society is, if people see that for example, I do it with integrity, I don't lie, I don't cheat. I do it I have good akhlaq when I speak to people. I have a particular way of, for example, I don't put money first, right? People will automatically be drawn to this. And even though we say, politically correct these days, we don't judge people based on their culture or not, I guarantee you they know if you're a Muslim or not as soon as they meet you, right? I've had patients tell me years later, like, I've been treating them for 10 years. They say, and they're not Muslims. I actually picked you as my GP because I'm interested in Islam. I was like, okay. And we've never ever talked about Islam, right? People make those connections very, very quickly. And then they also, in a good or bad way, judge us based on that, Unfortunately, sometimes we do the opposite. So I'm sure most of you here would not want to hire a Muslim tradie. Most of the time, as soon as you know that this tradie is from a particular background, most people just immediately will not want to hire someone from that background, right? And other jobs where we have reputations like that, right? So we need to be very careful, because this actually might put off someone completely from ever wanting to learn about Islam. Because they might hear it, they might read something nice, but then they see the action. So imagine that in everything that you do, whether it's with a Muslim or not, because it's not just with non-Muslims. So many Muslims are turned off Islam because of the actions of Muslims. So many Muslims don't ever attend a majlis or come to a mosque or an Islamic center because of the way they're treated by their fellow Muslims. So imagine that everything that you do will have a reflection on not just you as a person, but also your culture, and most importantly, Islam. And so in everything that we do, we should ask ourselves, is what I'm doing, is this something that has integrity or not? Am I doing the right thing in this situation or not? Because it will definitely reflect. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. I've come across a lot of reverts. Islam is a growing religion, not just because we have the highest birth rates in some Muslim countries compared to the rest of the world, but also because many, many people actually are making the active decision to change their religion or their way of life to Islam. Usually at the Ahl al-Bayt Center, I think you guys have hosted some programs there. Almost like recently, I would say once a month, we have someone reach out who wants to become Shia Muslim. Right. The other day, I was just going there we had some kids classes on Wednesday night, and there was a woman waiting outside, and I said, "Oh, is everything okay?" She said, "Yeah, I'm fine." And then, we did the class, came downstairs, and she said, "Oh, I'm here to do my shahada," right? I think she was like a she was Caucasian, I think from New Zealand, right? Then a couple of weeks ago, someone else, right? And when you talked, and we've had many, a few brothers who've now really stuck to the path of Islam and Shia Islam for many years, right? Even though they're from very different cultural backgrounds. And when you speak to them, most of the time, the initial trigger is an interaction with a person. For example, one Australian brother who lived in Penrith, he said that when I started to, I've never met a Muslim, I started to attend Western Sydney Uni, most of my class were Afghani and Iraqi and whatever, and they said we don't drink. And I was used to a culture where people drink. If you don't drink, you're weird, right? So if I gather with my family or my school friends from high school, it's weird if I don't drink, I get questioned about it, right? But with Muslims, it was the other way, and I immediately felt drawn to it. And it took me a few years, and then eventually he came to the center. He did his Shahada with Sheikh Hamid at the time. And he's now a doctor. He graduated from uni, and he's married to a Muslim sister, and he's very happy, right? It happened through an interaction with a person who set a good example. So it really makes a big difference. But one last point I just want to make is that, especially now in today's world, I think there are two things we need to do. One is what we just talked about, the akhlaq, the setting that really, really good moral example in our personal life with people. But the second thing that we need to do is we need to stand up for what's the truth and what is right and what's justice. Because more and more today, it's being absolutely, the truth is just becoming annihilated. And there are very few people who are willing to speak up, right? And none more so than this issue of LGBT and all this stuff, right? Many people. You just sit in your office one day, and if you have customers come in or students with your friends at school, ask most of them how they feel about it, and the vast majority will tell you it's crazy. What's happening in the world is just, it doesn't make sense. It's against biology. It's against intellect. It's against human nature. It's against the norms that humans have had for thousands of years. But then ask them to say something about it in public, and most people will say, no, I don't want to get in trouble, right? And so we have a role now as Muslims to be the example, right? To be the example for the other people, whether they're of faith or they just have common sense. Because the Prophet ﷺ, while he backed down on personal issues, never ever backed down on an issue of truth, justice, religion. Ever. He was extremely harsh, in fact, when it came to those issues, if he needed to be, right? And so me as a Muslim, being nice or being good, or being like setting the best example of akhlaq for people does not mean that I say, you know what, I'm even going to be nice to someone who is clearly doing something that's corrupting society, right? That's where my limit is. That's where I, in fact, have to set an example for others by standing up for the truth. And I firmly believe that one of the main reasons why people will enter Islam over the next 10 to 20 years will be because Muslims are going to take the biggest stand on this issue. Because most other religions have sort of learnt to give in to a lot of these things. But Muslims have, resist. We know like we need to resist. We've always been resisting, right? Particularly in secular societies. This is what in fact will draw people to Islam as much as our good akhlaq will. So we need to ensure that being good, being moral, being nice is very important, but that does not mean that I ever compromise on truth and justice, morality, right? Human nature, the law of God. No, on that I don't compromise. In fact, I show people in a nice way, right, the other side of the story. That's the story that's not being told in the mainstream, because that will draw them to Islam as much as my akhlaq, because they will find a place that they can belong. They will find a place where their very deep inner feelings are being acknowledged, are seen as positive, right? So many people have told me the reason why they enter Islam, like just again 2 months ago we had a brother visit. He was a revert from the Orthodox Church, and he said that the reason I became Muslim is because you guys have rules. You have rules, and in Christianity we're very lax about rules. You can do whatever you want as long as you love Jesus, you will achieve salvation. But in Islam, no, your actions, you're liable for them. You have rules in life. This is one of the big things, that the structure, the rules that is a big thing that draws people to Islam, and we can show people this by again exemplifying it in our lives. So inshallah, to summarize, we can be ambassadors of faith through our akhlaq, through our actions, through always having integrity in everything that we do, and secondly, by standing up for the truth, for justice, and for morality in a world that is very quickly losing its morality. May Allah bless us, inshallah, to be among those who represent the best image of Islam. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad.
صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. Ahsan, Jazakallah khair, Dr. Ali, for that enlightening lecture tonight. Indeed, when you stand for nothing, when you ignore, overlook, or try to twist and turn your own scriptures, your own narrations, then the question arises, what meaning is there in your religion? What meaning is there in your beliefs? You don't stand on anything. And this is what we see in modern society with the moral declines that are taking place. People try and twist and turn or try to justify in order to conform to the changing society, but they forget their roots. And this is very dangerous. Insha'Allah ta'ala, we as Muslims can hold on firmly to our roots. One other point, of course, the Holy Prophet's example truly touches the heart with the making eye contact with all of the people and also giving to that to the servant girl, not just his money as charity, but also his time. That's truly valuable. Giving your time to others. Sometimes it can be even more meaningful. So inshallah ta'ala, we can adopt these examples and be true ambassadors to our faith. With that, inshallah, I would like to invite Brother Abbas Zaidi for the Q&A segment. Please welcome him with a salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum, fellow brothers and sisters on the other side. How are we? Hopefully we're all good. Just a quick point from the speech is that the emphasis upon being ambassadors of our faith. I feel like that's something that we have to really stress. Just in my personal life alone, I remember working with someone for 3-4 days, and across that time it was Ramadan, and essentially he'd ask a lot of questions, and I would be able to tell him about fasting and about a range of other things. However, sadly, on the second last day, I believe, or last day, we came into another encounter with another Muslim, where they ended up swearing at each other, and for whatever reason, that man who I had spoken to, who I work with, had for some reason formulated a bad opinion about us Muslims. From that one encounter, even if I had, spoke to him about Islam and stuff, which shows essentially our vulnerability about how, how fast things can change and how careful we have to be. I believe that did get resolved in the end, but it's something for us to learn from. Getting right into the Q&A. So starting off with our first question. Ready? Yes. So thanks. With intermittent fasting becoming popular, we have normal fasting during Ramadan. So how can we reap the most benefits from fasting in terms of our diet? What diet practices are beneficial?
Sorry, diet in Ramadan?
Yes. So what practices regarding our diet are most beneficial in Ramadan?
Okay, I guess health benefits of fasting, is that what the question is sort of about?
I believe they want the health benefits in terms of like diet. So like I'm assuming something to do with what's good to eat, what's not good to eat. In that vein, I would assume.
Okay. Yes. So I think, as many of you might know, intermittent fasting is like the new trend, right? So back in maybe 15 years ago, everyone was saying eat like as many meals as you can during the day, and that was the health trend, and people were questioning fasting and saying that how come you Muslims fast when it's against all the health advice? But now, of course, everyone is fasting for 16, 18 hours a day, and it's the new trend, and it has very, very strongly proven health benefits. So fasting in itself, if you can in Shahr Ramadan or even outside that, is very, very beneficial in itself. Of course, the benefits would be offset if we're eating too much between iftar and suhoor or unhealthy foods. So I think just having a generally healthy diet without overeating between iftar and suhoor, if we can keep to that, then we'll reap the benefits of fasting.
Thanks for that. The second question is, what does salli mean in Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad?
So salat here has the meaning of sending, I guess, blessings or peace, blessings, mercy on the Prophet and his family.
Can I just ask one follow-up question to that one? Is there any kind of difference between the word salah and barakah?
That one I'll have to look up and get back to you. But if you have please contribute if you.
Not really. That's all.
I'll have to get back on that one. Sorry.
Moving on to the next question. What is the wisest way that we can respond to anti-Islamic aggression from colleagues at school or in the workplace?
Yeah, good question. So I think, like all those examples you mentioned from the holy imams, alayhimus salam, is, try and respond without it becoming a personal issue. So don't get angry as much as possible. Really try not to get angry that this person is, insulting me. And so trying to respond in a calm way, removing that emotion of that I'm getting attacked. Respond in a calm, respectful way, but also respond in a way that maybe can, clarify the correct position of Islam on that issue that person has brought up, I guess as much as possible if the situation allows.
Moving on to our next question. How do we bridge the gap that often exists between the older and younger generation, especially in light of the moral decline of modern society? For example, lack of family values, lack of family structure, etc., etc.
Yeah, very tough question. Look, I think it's hard. I think, on the one hand, I think the generational kind of gap is further increased if there's also like a language gap, a cultural gap, and so I think parents really need to strive to understand the world that their kids are living in, so language-wise, culture-wise, and just what the world that their children live in. And that's very, very difficult. I don't think it's easy for any parent to do, but I think the more effort that parents can put into that, the more the more that relationship with the child will inshallah strengthen. And if they can't do it themselves, to put their child in an environment where there are mentors and people who do understand the situation that their child is in, the world that their child's growing up in, because then if they can't get the advice directly from the parent, or the parent is not understanding the situation, there's someone else trustworthy who can help with that communication. And then from the children's perspective, again, it's even harder because you're younger and you haven't had the life experience, but also trying to understand that really, like, the world of your parents is very different as well, right? Just like, for example, when your parents say something and you think it's not cool, or they tell a joke and you think it's lame, and it's not really like the what happens and how people talk today. Just remember that that's exactly how like they feel. Not that you're not cool because they love you, but really it's completely foreign to them, the jokes that you make, the way you speak. So it's very hard, when you're young, but trying to make that effort to somehow think, how can I explain this to my mum or dad in a different way, or what's the benefit of the way they see things? Yes, it might not be, I don't agree at all, but what are some of the benefits of the way that they want to do things, and trying to sort of see things in a more circumspect way. But it's not easy.
Quick follow-up just on that. I think oftentimes the issue is parents might work too many hours and they don't get to spend enough time with their children and essentially leave them to their own devices. I think when you spend more time, he's laughing, I'm not sure why.
Are you a parent? That's why he's laughing.
The devices, man, the technology is getting our kids. Yeah.
So I think like when you spend more time with the children, they're more likely to be attached to you and your teachings, your sense of upbringing. But I think that gets a little difficult with really demanding workloads and stuff.
Yeah, definitely. Very good point. Time. You know, if he's just spending time with children, can really help bridge those gaps.
Moving on to our next question. What is the purpose behind putting on an armband with Imam Ali Rada's name on it? And when did this trend start?
Imam
Ali Rada.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think that's something that might be is it quite common in Pakistani Indo-Paki culture? Is that, or is it? Yeah. Yeah.
Especially like on wedding ceremonies, they put armband on both the bride and the groom.
Okay. Yeah, doesn't happen much in Arabic culture, so I don't know how to answer that one. But I think it's just, you know, blessings, wanting to get blessings from the imam, or if there's.
Can I interject?
Yeah.
So from what I heard about this is during the time of Ma'mun, in order for him to gain more popularity, he put the imam's face on the coin. And so what the Shias of the time, they started putting the coins and wrapping it and putting it on the arm for good luck. I believe. I'm not most thing, but that's just what I've heard. Well, just his name? Just his name. Okay, moving on to our last question for the night. Can you give us a character building strategy briefly?
Okay, that's a good question. So I think the important point is to work on things gradually. So, you know, whatever good characteristic you want to instill in yourself, start very gradually. So if you have difficulty, for example, with focusing on studies, you would want to start with very, very small increments of time, and then, you know, start with, let me focus for 20 minutes without a phone or a screen or a device. And then you could, you know, every month you could extend that by, you know, 5 minutes. Or if it's, you know, you want to, for example, control your anger, then you would set yourself a goal of just like, let me just not get angry at anyone just for one day. And you would write that down just to kind of reinforce it in yourself on your phone or on a piece of paper. And then, you know, once you've got to a day, you'd set yourself the next goal of, you know, let me not get angry or yell at anyone for 2 days. And then you would slowly kind of extend that. So gradual change is always more effective than sudden changes or going cold turkey with anything. And so, yeah, it's about identifying the goal that you most need in your life. So if anger is your problem, that's your goal. If, you know, lust is your problem, that's your goal. And then identifying the problem, setting your goal, the characteristic you want to achieve, and then having a plan to do that, but gradually, and starting with very, very small steps and then working your way up.
Thanks for that. I appreciate the knowledge you have shared with us today, and I'd like to invite Brother Hussein for the next segment.
Thank you very much.
Jazakallah khair, Hajj, Dr. Ali and Brother Abbas, for that enlightening and engaging Q&A session. Alhamdulillah, I hope we all learned something, and I hope we can try and remodel our perspective on life, on the world, inshallah ta'ala, more in line with the path of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam moving forward, and inshallah we can all build our characters as well. For the next segment, inshallah, I'd like to invite our respected brothers, Jahangir Hussain, and then Brother Aun Hassan Sayyid and Hajj Ashiq Rasul, Sayyid Ashiq Rasul, to recite Manqabat. Please welcome them with the loud salawat ala Muhammad wa ala Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah. First of all, I would like to congratulate everyone on the birth anniversary of Imam Rida. Please recite a loud salawat. With your permission, I will recite a mankabat. It's actually in Urdu, so sorry if someone doesn't understand it. So please recite a loud salawat again. مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا. دل یہ دیتا ہے صدا لا دوا کی تو دوا, دل یہ دیتا ہے صدا لا دوا کی تو دوا, حاجتیں کر دو روا حاجت روا. میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا. مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا. تو ہے سلطان عرب تو ہے سلطان عجم تو معین الضعفاء. مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا. ترس رہا ہوں پیاس بڑی ہے تیرے در کی آس بڑی ہے, کر دو کرم میرا رکھ لو بھرم, دور ہوں سارے غم میرے مولا رضا. مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا. دور کنارہ کوئی نہیں ہے اور سہارا کوئی نہیں ہے, جاؤں کہاں پھر رہا ہوں یہاں اے ولی دو جہاں میرے مولا رضا. مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا. ساتھ زباں کے تن من بولا خالی بھر دے دامن مولا. صابر سخی اے وسیع نبی یا رضی یا وفی میرے مولا رضا. مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا. کل تک جو تھا آج نہیں ہے, حقداروں کا راج نہیں ہے, آئے وہی جو ہے حق کا وسیل, التجا ہے یہی میرے مولا رضا. مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا. سوچ رہے ہیں سارے یہاں ہم, مشکل ہے اب جائیں کہاں ہم, سرحد میں ہے ہم تو ایک حد میں ہیں اور مشہد میں ہیں میرے مولا رضا. مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا. ہر ایک فقیر کا ہے آسرا امام رضا, غموں کی شب میں کرم کی ضیا امام رضا. بڑے سخی ہیں طلب سے زیادہ دیتے ہیں, علی کی طرح ہے مشکل کشا امام رضا. امام رضا امام رضا. آپ کے بابا شافی محشر, دین خدا کے آپ ہیں رہبر. ابن سخی آپ ہیں متقی, تیسرے ہیں علی میرے مولا رضا. مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا. معجزہ کوئی ایسا دکھا دے اپنے در پہ سب کو بلا کے, زوار کر سب ازادار کر مثل مختار کر میرے مولا رضا. مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا. ادنا ہیں ہم سب گداگر, کرتے رہیں یوں ہی سناگر, پڑھتے رہیں صدا لکھتے رہیں اور کہتے رہیں میرے مولا رضا. مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا میرے مولا رضا پر محمد و آل محمد صلوات.
صلوات محمد و آل محمد. I'll be really brief, 2 stanzas maybe. اللهم صل على علي ابن موسى الرضا المرتضى الإمام التقي النقي بحجتك على من فوق الأرض وتحت الثرى الصديق الشهيد صلاة كثيرة ناظمة زكية متواترة متواصلة مترادفة. درود پڑھتے گا محمد وآل محمد. Just 2 3 stanzas. سلطان عرب شاہ خراسان ارباب رضا مولا. سلطان عرب شاہ خراسان ارباب رضا مولا. نوبت ہے تیری شاہی کا اعلان ارباب 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 رضا مولا. سلطان عرب شاہ خراسان ارباب رضا مولا. تبدیلیاں تو لوح پہ کرتا ہے قلم سے واقف ہے زمانہ تیرے انداز کرم سے. اللہ بھی رکھتا ہے تیرا مان ارباب 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 رضا مولا. سلطان عرب شاہ خراسان ارباب رضا مولا. For those of you who have been to Mashhad will actually relate to this. روزے کی زیارت میں عجب حج کا مزہ ہے. زمزم ہے سبیل اور منا صحن شفا ہے. روزہ ہے تیرا کعبہ ایمان ارباب 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 رضا مولا. سلطان عرب شاہ خراسان ارباب رضا مولا. اور پہنچاتا ہے مجھ کو یہ کسی اور جہاں میں. میں صحن میں ہوتے ہوئے اڑتا ہوں جہاں میں. ہے فرش تیرا تخت سلیمان ارباب 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 رضا مولا. سلطان عرب شاہ خراسان ارباب رضا مولا. And the last one. ہے عرض یہی بارگاہ کون مقام مومن نہ رہے کوئی پریشان جہاں میں. بس آپ کا دشمن ہو پریشان ارباب 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 رضا مولا. سلطان عرب شاہ خراسان ارباب رضا مولا. درود پڑھ دیگا محمد وآل محمد.
حاضری کے لیے منقبت مولا علی 2-3 اشعار ہیں. درود پاک پڑھیے گا. اللہم صلی علی محمد وآل محمد وعجل فرجہم. بیان کرنے کو یوں تو دنیا شرف بیان کرتی ہے سبھی کے. مگر جو عقل سلیم رکھتا ہے جانتا ہے سوا نبی کے. نہیں ہے کوئی علی سے
بدر و احد سے پوچھو، عمر کے دو نیم سر سے پوچھو، علی کی دو انگلیوں کی طاقت ہے کیا یہ خیبر کے در سے پوچھو، قسم خدا کی مثال حیدر کوئی نہیں ہے، کوئی نہیں۔ غدیر سے جب یہ میں نے پوچھا، ہے تجھ کو معلوم سارا قصہ، سوا علی کے ہے کوئی جس کو، سوا علی کے ہے اور کوئی، بنایا جس کو نبی نے مولا، تڑپ کے بولا یہ خون کا منبر کوئی نہیں ہے، کوئی نہیں۔ علی کی تلوار چل رہی ہے، نبی کا چہرہ دمک رہا ہے، کوئی ڈٹا ہے احد میں، کوئی نظر بچا کر سرک رہا ہے، نبی کے پاس اب سوائے حیدر کوئی نہیں ہے، کوئی نہیں۔ بر محمد والے محمد۔
Now I'd like to request everyone to please stand up so we can recite Zara.